What happens when you sign away your past, your heart, and the man you love, all with a single stroke of a pen? For one woman, that signature on a divorce paper was meant to be an ending. She walked away from $1 billion empire, a cheating husband, and a life of gilded misery, carrying a secret she vowed he would never know. She vanished. But endings are often just brutal beginnings. 6 months later, a desperate millionaire on the verge of the biggest deal of his life turns on the TV to see the new CEO of the company he's courting. And as the camera zooms in, his world shatters. The woman on screen isn't just his new boss. She's his pregnant, supposedly broken-hearted ex-wife. And she's not here to forgive. She's here to take over. The rain fell in sheets against the panoramic windows of the penthouse, mirroring the silent, streaming tears Amelia couldn't allow to fall. The apartment, once a sanctuary of shared laughter and whispered dreams, now felt like a mausoleum. Every piece of art, every custom-made piece of furniture was a monument to a love she now believed was a meticulously crafted lie. Across the vast marble table sat Julian Thorne, a man whose face was a study in controlled indifference. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes, which once looked at her with an adoration that could melt glaciers, were now as cold and hard as the diamonds on the watch encircling his wrist. He was the king of Thorne Industries, a self-made titan of the global logistics world, a man who could move mountains of cargo across continents, but couldn't or wouldn't move to save his own marriage. Between them lay the divorce papers, a thick, damning stack of legal jargon that boiled down to one simple, brutal fact: their forever had an expiration date. Today. "Is there anything you wish to discuss, Amelia?" Julian's voice was clipped businesslike. It was the voice he used to dismantle competitors, not the one he used to use to whisper her name in the dark. Amelia's gaze flickered to the source of her agony, a silver-framed photograph he hadn't even bothered to put away. It was on the credenza behind him, a candid shot from a charity gala last month. Julian laughing with his arm wrapped possessively around Isabel Vance, the stunning raven-haired CEO of a rival firm. They weren't just standing together. They were intertwined, their bodies, speaking a language of intimacy that screamed louder than any confession. The tabloids had called it a daring new alliance. Amelia knew it was a dagger to the heart of their vows. She had confronted him, her voice shaking the gossip columns clutched in her hand. He hadn't denied it. He had offered no explanation, no apology, just a chilling silence that confirmed her worst fears. Pride, it seemed, was the cornerstone of the Julian Thorne empire, and he would rather let his marriage crumble into dust than admit to a fault. "No, Julian, there's nothing left to say," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. She had cried all her tears in the lonely nights leading up to this moment. Now all that remained was a hollow, aching resolve. Her hand trembled as she reached for the ornate fountain pen. Her fingers brushed against the slight, almost imperceptible curve of her lower abdomen. Our secret, she thought, a fresh wave of pain washing over her. She was 8 weeks pregnant. A tiny, flickering life was growing within her. A life conceived during a weekend in the Maldives, a trip she now saw as a final, cruel act of deception. He would never know. She would rather raise this child alone in obscurity than let them be a pawn in the toxic games of the wealthy, another asset to be fought over and leveraged. This child would be hers and hers alone. Julian watched her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it regret? Impatience? She couldn't tell anymore. The man she knew or thought she knew was gone. "The settlement is, as you know, exceedingly generous," he stated, gesturing to the papers. "The penthouse, the villa in Tuscany, a lifelong stipend that would ensure you never have to work again. I have upheld my end of the bargain." The bargain? That's what their marriage had become. A transaction. She looked at the clauses detailing the division of their assets, a fortune so vast it was almost comical. He was giving her trinkets, gilded cages, to live out her lonely life while he kept the thing that mattered most, his freedom, his reputation, his empire. She didn't want his money. She wanted the man who had wooed her with street cart tacos and stargazing on a rooftop before he was Julian Thorne, the magnate. But that man was a ghost. With a deep, shuddering breath, Amelia uncapped the pen. The scratching sound it made on the thick paper was deafening in the silence. She signed her name, a name she would soon shed on each dotted line. With the final signature, a sense of profound, terrifying finality washed over her. It was done. She pushed the papers back across the table. "I won't be taking the settlement, Julian," she said, her voice clear and cold. He looked up, genuinely startled for the first time. "What are you talking about?" "It's all been arranged by the lawyers." "Unarrange it," she said, standing up. Her legs felt weak, but her spine was steel. "I don't want your houses or your money. I want nothing from you." "Amelia, don't be ridiculous. Where will you go?" "What will you do?" There was a crack in his composure, a sliver of the old Julian showing through. "That's no longer your concern," she said, turning her back on him, on the life they had built, on the lie that had shattered it. She walked out of the penthouse, not looking back, her hand resting protectively on the secret she carried. As the elevator doors closed, she finally allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of war. Julian stood frozen in the silent room, the signed papers a testament to his failure. He picked up the photograph of him and Isabel. It had been a calculated business move, a way to spook a competitor into a merger. Isabel had played her part perfectly, leaning in just as the photographer snapped the picture. He had meant to explain it to Amelia, but his damnable pride, his fury at being questioned, had silenced him. He had thought she would demand the truth. He never imagined she would simply break and walk away. He sank into his chair, the vast, empty apartment, suddenly feeling like a tomb. He had won the battle of wills, but as the silence pressed in on him, he was terrifyingly aware that he had just lost everything that mattered. 6 months, 182 days of silence. For Julian Thorne, those 6 months were a blur of ruthless efficiency. He'd thrown himself into his work with a ferocity that bordered on self-destruction. He finalized the hostile takeover that the photo with Isabel Vance had been designed to provoke. He expanded Thorne Industries into 2 new continents. He was richer, more powerful, and more feared than ever before. He was also utterly, devastatingly alone. Amelia had vanished as if she were a mirage. She hadn't touched her bank accounts. She hadn't contacted any of their mutual friends. She had dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only the ghost of her perfume in a walk-in closet he could no longer bring himself to enter. He had hired private investigators, the best in the world, but they came back with nothing. It was as if she had ceased to exist. The void she left was a constant gnawing ache in his chest, a phantom limb he reached for in the dead of night. For Amelia, those 6 months were a crucible. She had left the penthouse with nothing but a small suitcase and a resolute will to survive. Her first call had been to a number she hadn't dialed in over a decade, the the number for her maternal grandmother's estate lawyer in Geneva. Her grandmother, Cordelia Dubois, had been a recluse, an eccentric genius. Amelia had only met a handful of times as a child. Cordelia had always been a figure of mystery, a brilliant physicist who had walked away from academia to build a private, secretive technology company. The call had changed everything. The lawyer, a kind elderly gentleman named Mr. Harrison, had informed her of a staggering reality. Her grandmother had passed away peacefully 2 months prior, and in her will she had left her entire fortune and her life's work not to a foundation, but to her only granddaughter. Amelia was the sole heir to Orogen Innovations. It wasn't just a company, it was a revolution. Hidden from the public eye, Cordelia had pioneered groundbreaking technologies in sustainable energy and AI-driven environmental solutions. Orogen was decades ahead of its time, a sleeping giant with the power to reshape the world. And it was now Amelia's. The inheritance came with a single handwritten letter from Cordelia. "My dearest Amelia," it read, "I have watched you from afar. I saw the bright, curious girl grow into a woman of immense strength, a strength you yourself do not yet recognize. You married a man of power, and I have seen how such power can corrupt and consume. I leave you not just my company, but a choice. You can hide from the world, or you can command it. I built Orogen to be a force for good, a shield against the very greed that I see poisoning the planet. To lead it, you must become more than the woman you were. You must become a force of nature. The resources are yours. The choice is yours. Do not let them break you. Build." Amelia read the letter 100 times, its words becoming a mantra. The grief for her lost marriage was slowly, painstakingly transmuted into fuel. Her growing belly was a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. She wasn't just building a future for herself, she was building a world for her child. She moved into a quiet, secure apartment in Geneva, provided by the estate. The next 6 months were the most intense of her life. Guided by the loyal Mr. Harrison, she dove headfirst into a brutal education. Her days were filled with tutorials on quantum computing, market analysis, corporate law, and advanced robotics. Her nights were spent poring over her grandmother's journals, understanding not just the technology, but the philosophy behind it. She transformed. The soft society wife was chiseled away, revealing a sharp, discerning leader. She cut her long, flowing hair into a chic, no-nonsense bob. She traded her designer dresses for tailored power suits. Her grief was still there, a core of cold iron within her, but it was no longer a weakness. It was her armor. There were challenges. The existing chief operating officer of Orogen, Marcus Blackwood, was a slick, ambitious man who had expected to take over after Cordelia's death. He viewed Amelia with unconcealed disdain, an unqualified socialite who had lucked into a position she didn't deserve. He subtly undermined her at every turn, planting seeds of doubt among the board members. "With all due respect, Ms. Vance," he'd begun in one meeting, using her maiden name as a subtle jab. "It's Mrs. Thorne for now, Marcus," she had corrected him. Her voice quiet but firm, letting the name hang in the air, a reminder of a past power he understood. "And my marital status is irrelevant. What is relevant is the Q3 projection for the Helios project. It's underperforming by 12%. I want to know why, and your plan to fix it will be on my desk by morning." The board had stared, stunned. Marcus, for his part, had looked at her with a newfound and begrudging respect. She learned to fight, to command, to anticipate. She was no longer just surviving. She was preparing for war. Her master plan began to take shape. Orogen, for all its brilliance, had remained in the shadows. It was time for it to step into the light, and she knew just the way to do it. A strategic merger, an acquisition that would not only launch Orogen onto the global stage, but also settle a personal score. Thorn Industries was in trouble. Julian's aggressive expansion had left the company over-leveraged. He was bleeding capital, and he desperately needed a lifeline. His salvation depended on a massive, exclusive contract to become the logistics partner for a revolutionary new green tech company that was about to go public. That company was Orogen Innovations. He had been courting them for months, dealing with the formidable but faceless COO Marcus Blackwood, completely unaware of who now held the reins. The final deal was set to be announced. Amelia stood in her Geneva office, looking out at the shimmering lake, her hand on her now prominent 6-month belly. Mr. Harrison entered a tablet in his hand. "The media is assembled, Amelia," he said gently. "Global Business Network is going live with the announcement in 5 minutes. Marcus is there, ready to make the initial statement. They are all expecting him to be named the new CEO." "Let them," Amelia said, a cool smile touching her lips. "Mr. Blackwood is about to be very disappointed." "And Julian Thorn?" Mr. Harrison asked, a note of concern in his voice. Amelia's smile vanished. "Mr. Thorn is about to learn that karma is not a myth. It's a woman in a Chanel suit holding the fate of his company in her hands." She turned to the large screen on her wall, the GBN logo glowing brightly. The countdown had begun. It was time for the world and her ex-husband to meet the new Amelia. Julian Thorn swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, the ice clinking softly. He stood in his cavernous office, the city lights of New York sprawling beneath him like a carpet of scattered jewels. On the wall, a massive screen was tuned to the Global Business Network. The ticker at the bottom of the screen was a sea of green, all except for his own company's stock, The8RN, stubbornly, infuriatingly red. This deal was everything. The culmination of 6 months of brutal negotiations. Orogen Innovations was his white whale. Their technology was the key to future-proofing his logistics empire, making it the greenest, most efficient on the planet. The exclusive partnership would send his stock soaring, silence the naysayers, and plug the financial holes ripped open by his own aggressive ambition. He'd been dealing with Orogen's COO Marcus Blackwood, a shark in a Savile Row suit. Blackwood had been tough, unyielding, but Julian respected him, a worthy adversary and soon a valuable partner. The final piece of the puzzle was the official announcement of Orogen's new leadership. The reclusive founder, Cordelia Dubois, had passed away, and the company was finally stepping out of the shadows. The new CEO was to be revealed live just before the merger announcement. Julian expected it to be Blackwood. It was the logical choice. "And we're live in 3, 2, 1. The anchor on GBN said, her smile bright and professional. "Welcome back to Market Makers. The entire financial world is buzzing today with news from the highly secretive tech giant Orogen Innovations. After the passing of its legendary founder Cordelia Dubois, the company is poised to announce its new CEO and a landmark partnership that could reshape the future of green logistics." Julian leaned forward, his knuckles white on the edge of his desk. This was it. Joining us live from Orogen headquarters in Geneva is COO Marcus Blackwood. The anchor continued. Blackwood appeared on screen, looking smug and confident against the backdrop of the Orogen logo. "Thank you, Cynthia. It's a historic day for us. We are about to embark on a new era of transparency and growth. The billion-dollar question, Marcus, Cynthia said, leaning into the camera, is who will be leading this new era? The street assumes it's you. Blackwood's smile was a masterpiece of feigned modesty. Well, Cynthia, our late founder, was a woman of many surprises. The board has honored her final wishes, and our new chief executive officer is someone who embodies her vision for the future, someone with a unique personal stake in building a better world. Julian took a sip of his scotch. "Get on with it," he muttered at the screen. "So, without further ado," Blackwood said, turning to face just off camera, "it is my distinct honor to introduce the new CEO of Auragen Innovations." The camera panned away from Blackwood. Julian watched, impatient. It would be some tech prodigy from MIT or a seasoned executive poached from a rival. It didn't matter as long as they signed the contract. The camera settled on a figure stepping towards the podium. A woman, elegant, poised, dressed in a sharp navy blue power suit that accentuated the unmistakable curve of a pregnancy. Her hair was different, cut short, in a style that framed a face he knew better than his own. Julian's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the Italian marble floor. The sound was lost in the roaring that suddenly filled his ears. It couldn't be. His mind rebelled, refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was a ghost, a spectre from a life he had bulldozed. But this was no ghost. She was real, solid, and radiating a confidence that stunned him. The anchor's voice seemed to come from a great distance. An incredible development. It appears the new CEO is Amelia Thorne. Amelia stepped up to the microphone, her calm grey eyes looking directly into the camera, as if she could see right through the lens, through the miles of fiber optic cable, and into his soul. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of any of the tremor he remembered. It was the voice of a commander. "Good morning. I am Amelia Thorne, and I am the new CEO of Auragen Innovations." The world tilted on its axis. Julian stumbled back, grabbing his desk for support. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The timeline clicked into place with sickening precision. The Maldives, the divorce, the 6 months of silence. His child, a child he never knew existed, a child she had hidden from him. On the screen, Amelia was commanding the stage. Auragen was founded on the principle of innovation with integrity. She continued, her hand resting gently, possessively on her belly. "It is a legacy I intend to honor, not just for our shareholders, but for the next generation." The gesture was unmistakable, a deliberate, targeted strike. The GBN anchor was stammering. This is truly unprecedented. Ms. Thorne, you are of course the estranged wife of Julian Thorne, the head of Thorne Industries, the very company you are rumored to be partnering with. This raises 1,000 questions." Amelia gave a small, unreadable smile. "My personal history is just that. History. My focus is the future of this company. And yes, we have been in negotiations with several logistics partners. Thorne Industries is one of them." She looked directly into the camera again, her gaze piercing. "But let me be clear. As of this morning, no deal has been signed. Auragen will only partner with a company that meets our rigorous standards of stability, transparency, and ethical governance. We will be re-evaluating all proposals under this new leadership." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. Re-evaluating. It was a death sentence. She wasn't just announcing her return. She was publicly placing a gun to the head of his company. She held all the cards. His savior had become his executioner. His phone began to ring, a frantic, incessant shrill. His investors, his board, the media. He ignored them all. His eyes glued to the screen, to the woman who was a stranger, and yet intimately, painfully familiar. The broken-hearted wife he had dismissed was gone. In her place stood a queen, a rival, the mother of his child, and unbelievably, his new boss. The silence in his office was no longer just empty. It was filled with the sound of his empire beginning to crack. The air in the Auragen boardroom was so thick with tension, it felt like a physical weight. The long, polished obsidian table reflected the strained faces of the executives assembled. At one end sat Julian Thorne and his two most senior legal counsels. At the other, in the CEO's chair, sat Amelia. She looked serene, a stark contrast to the maelstrom Julian felt raging inside him. It had been a week since the GBN announcement. A week of pure, unadulterated hell for Julian. His stock had plummeted on the uncertainty. His board was in a panic, demanding answers he didn't have. He hadn't slept, subsisting on coffee and a burning mixture of fury, betrayal, and a terrifying, desperate need to understand. He had tried to reach her, of course. Dozens of calls to her new office, all of which were routed to a brisk, polite assistant, who informed him that Mrs. Thorne's schedule is fully committed, but she looks forward to your official meeting on Tuesday. Now Tuesday was here. She had kept him waiting for precisely 15 minutes, a classic power move he himself had used countless times. When she finally entered, flanked by Mr. Harrison and a stern-looking legal team, she didn't so much as glance in his direction. "Good morning, gentlemen," she'd said to the room at large, taking her seat. "Thank you for coming. Let's begin." The meeting was a brutal clinical dissection of Thorne Industries' finances. Amelia's team, armed with data she'd had them collate for weeks, took apart his company piece by piece. They highlighted the over-leveraged assets, the risky emerging market gambles, the razor-thin profit margins. They spoke of instability and unacceptable risk. Julian sat in stunned silence, watching her. She was brilliant. She was ruthless. She was using his own tactics against him. He saw no trace of the woman who used to fall asleep with her head on his lap while they watched old movies. This was a different person, forged in a fire he had started. Finally, after an hour of this systematic dismantling, she spoke directly to him for the first time. "So, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cool and professional, "as you can see from a purely financial perspective, your company is a high-risk proposition. The board has serious reservations." The formality of Mr. Thorne was like a slap. "Amelia, this is absurd." He burst out, his voice raw. "This is a solid proposal. You know my company. You know me." "On the contrary," she replied, her eyes meeting his for a brief, chilling moment. "I'm beginning to realize I didn't know you at all. And as for your company, what I know is what the data tells me. It's a house of cards." Behind her, Marcus Blackwood watched the exchange with a predatory stillness. He had been publicly humiliated by her ascension, but he was a survivor. He could see the new lines of power being drawn, and was already calculating how to play them to his advantage. "This isn't about finances, and you know it." Julian pressed his voice, lowering. "We need to talk, privately." "My private life is not on the agenda," Amelia said crisply. "This is a business meeting. If Thorne Industries wishes to remain in consideration, I will require a revised proposal, one that includes a significant equity transfer to Auragen as collateral against your instability. Say, 30%. Julian's lawyers gasped. 30%. It was corporate piracy. She wasn't just asking for a partnership, she was demanding control. "That's outrageous," Julian snarled. "You're trying to gut me." "I'm trying to protect my company," she countered smoothly. "My child's legacy." She let her hand drift to her stomach again. The move was subtle, but in the silent room it was a nuclear bomb. It was a reminder of the ultimate secret, the ultimate betrayal. His child whose legacy she was now wielding as a weapon against him. "You have 48 hours to submit the revised offer," she concluded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This meeting is over." She stood, and her team stood with her. She walked out of the room without a backward glance. Julian was left staring at her empty chair, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was trapped. If he refused, his company would likely collapse within months. If he accepted, he would be handing over a massive stake of the empire he built to the woman he had scorned, making her one of his single largest shareholders. He would be answering to her not just as a business partner, but as a partial owner. Later that day, desperate, he managed to bypass her security by waiting for her in the private parking garage. As she walked toward her car, he stepped out of the shadows. "Amelia." She didn't flinch. She simply stopped, her expression unreadable. "This is inappropriate, Julian." "Inappropriate? What you did in that boardroom was a declaration of war," he said, his voice echoing in the concrete space. "And the baby, Amelia. The baby. You were pregnant when you signed those papers. You looked me in the eye and said nothing." The anguish he had suppressed for a week finally broke through. "It's mine, isn't it?" Her composure finally cracked just for a second. A flicker of the old pain, the deep, raw hurt flashed in her eyes. "You have no right to ask that. You gave up all your rights when you chose your pride, your ambition, and her." She spat the word over your wife. "It wasn't what you thought," he exclaimed, taking a step closer. "Isabel, it was business, a setup to force a rival's hand. I was going to explain everything. When?" She shot back, her voice laced with bitter irony. "After another month of lies. After the baby was born, and you could deny it. You didn't fight for me, Julian. You let me walk away. You stood there and let me go." She fumbled for her car keys, her hands shaking. "I am doing what I have to do to protect myself and my child," she said, her voice trembling with emotion she quickly suppressed. "You taught me how the world works. Power is the only thing that matters. Now I have it. You will submit the proposal as requested, or you will find another partner. Stay away from me." She got into her car, the door slamming shut with a deafening finality. Julian stood helpless as her car sped away, leaving him alone in the dim light of the garage with the full weight of his catastrophic mistakes. He hadn't just lost his wife, he had created his own worst enemy. And he was beginning to suspect that someone else had been pulling the strings all along. The image of Isabel Vance, smiling that triumphant smile, flashed in his mind. The explanation he'd given Amelia was the truth, but now he wondered if Isabel's motives had been far more sinister than he'd ever imagined. Julian Thorne was a predator. It was how he'd built his empire, by sensing weakness, by seeing patterns others missed, and by relentlessly hunting down the truth. And as he replayed Amelia's words in the parking garage, "You chose her," a cold, sickening suspicion began to crystallize in his mind. He had been played, brilliantly and destructively played. He didn't fight Amelia's terms. His lawyers were aghast, but Julian waved them away. He sent the revised proposal, agreeing to the 30% equity transfer upon the finalization of the deal. It was a move born of desperation, but also of strategy. It would buy him time. Time to prove to Amelia that he wasn't the villain she thought he was. To do that, he had to unmask the real one. His first move was to sever all ties with Isabel Vance. He called her his voice a block of ice. "Our business is concluded, Isabel. Permanently." "Julian, darling." Her voice purred through the phone. "Don't be so dramatic. We made a great team. I hear you're in a bit of trouble. Perhaps you need another alliance. The only thing I need is for you to stay the hell away from my company," he said, "and my family." He hung up before she could reply, but her confident, mocking tone unnerved him. She wasn't acting like a spurned business associate. She was acting like a victor. Julian retreated to his penthouse, turning it into a war room. He hired not a standard private investigator, but a team of elite forensic cybersecurity experts, the kind governments used to track terrorists. He gave them a simple, clear directive. "I want to know everything about Isabel Vance for the past year. Her financials, her communications, her associates. Everything." While the team worked, Julian began his own investigation. He started with the gala photograph. He got the name of the photographer and paid him an exorbitant fee for every single shot he took that night. In the data dump of over 2,000 photos, he found it. A series of 3 shots taken in rapid succession. The first showed him talking to a dignitary, with Isabel several feet away watching him. The second showed her striding toward him with purpose. The third was the infamous photo, where she had wrapped her arm around him, laughing as if at an intimate joke, just as the flash went off. But what caught his eye was a figure in the background, Marcus Blackwood, COO of Auragen, standing near a pillar, watching the entire exchange with a small, knowing smile, his phone in his hand, as if he'd just sent a text. The first piece clicked into place. Blackwood had been at the gala. Why? He had no connection to the charity. The next breakthrough came from his cyber team. They had found a ghost, a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands funded by an anonymous source, had been aggressively buying up debt from Julian's creditors. For the past 6 months, as his company became more and more leveraged, this single mysterious entity had been positioning itself to become his primary debt holder. If Thorn Industries defaulted, this corporation would have the power to seize his assets. "Trace the source of the funding," Julian commanded. "I want to know who is behind it." The answer came 2 days later, and it hit Julian like a physical blow. The money trail was a labyrinth of offshore accounts and proxies, but at its origin was a single transfer from a private holding company. A holding company owned by Isabel Vance. She wasn't just trying to create a scandal to help with a merger. She was orchestrating his complete destruction. The plan was diabolical in its scope. Use the scandal to alienate Amelia, his emotional bedrock, knowing it would destabilize him. 2. In his distracted, grief-fueled state, encourage his riskiest, most aggressive expansion plans, stretching his company financially thin. 3. Simultaneously have Marcus Blackwood, her inside man, at Auragen Stonewall, and delay the negotiations for the partnership he desperately needed, pushing him further to the brink. 4. While he was bleeding capital, secretly buy up his debt. 5. The final move would be for Auragen, under Blackwood's anticipated leadership, to reject the deal, causing his stock to collapse and triggering a default on his loans. Isabel's Shell Corp would then seize Thorn Industries for pennies on the dollar. It was a corporate assassination, and it had almost worked. The only thing she hadn't counted on was Amelia, the unexpected heir, the pregnant wife who had refused to break, who had instead risen from the ashes and taken control of the one company that could save him or destroy him. The final piece of evidence was the smoking gun. The cyber team decrypted a series of messages from a burner phone registered to a phantom employee at Vance Corp. The messages were between Isabel and Marcus Blackwood. Marcus: "The wife is gone. He's a mess. He's expanding into Asia just like you predicted, taking the bait. Isabel, excellent. Keep the pressure on from your end. Stall the Auragen deal. He needs to feel the squeeze. Marcus, problem. The old woman's will. It's the wife. She's the new owner. She's here. Isabel. What, handle it. Get her out. Convince the board she's incompetent. Marcus. Not that simple. She's smarter than we thought, and she hates him. She might just finish the job for us. Isabel. Don't rely on her emotions. We need to control the outcome. The World Economic Forum meeting in Davos is next month. The final deal will be signed there. That's our last chance. If Thorne gets the deal, we lose. We need to make sure she rejects him publicly. Marcus. I have an idea. A way to make both Thorne and the new queen look like fools on the world stage. It will require a data leak, something that invalidates Auragen's core tech claims right before the announcement. Isabel. Do it. Ruin them both. Julian stared at the transcripts, a cold, hard rage building within him. He had been a fool blinded by pride. He had wronged Amelia in the worst way, not by cheating, but by failing to see the real threat, by failing to protect them from it. His silence, his arrogance, it had given Isabel the perfect weapon. He now had the truth. But would Amelia believe him? Or would she see this as just another one of his manipulative games? He looked at the evidence laid out on his table. It wasn't enough to just show her. He had to prove it to her and to the entire world. And he knew exactly where he had to do it. The stage her enemies had chosen for his downfall would become the stage for their own. He was going to Davos. The air in Davos, Switzerland was thin cold and charged with power. Snow-capped peaks loomed over the small town, which had transformed into a fortress of global influence for the annual World Economic Forum. World leaders, tech billionaires, and financial titans moved in heavily secured convoys, their discussions capable of shifting markets and redrawing maps. It was the perfect stage for either a coronation or an execution. The joint announcement between Auragen Innovations and Thorne Industries was the most anticipated event of the forum. It was scheduled to take place in the main Congress Hall, a room buzzing with the world's most influential media. The deal, especially with the drama of its two main players, was the hottest story of the year. Amelia felt the pressure acutely. She was now nearly 8 months pregnant, and the strain of the past months was beginning to take its toll. She moved with a deliberate grace, her tailored maternity coat doing little to hide her condition. She felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy, her child's future, and the eyes of the world upon her. Marcus Blackwood had been a model of solicitous support all week, a serpent hiding in plain sight. "Don't you worry, Amelia," he'd said to her that morning. "I've triple-checked the presentation. It's flawless. We're going to show the world the power of Auragen." He was planning to do just that, but not in the way she imagined. Julian had arrived in Davos 2 days earlier, but he had remained a ghost. He made no attempt to contact her, a silence that unnerved her more than his previous desperation. She didn't know that he and his cyber team had set up a command center in a nearby chalet, working around the clock preparing for war. The moment arrived, Amelia, flanked by Mr. Harrison, and a smug-looking Marcus took her place on the stage. Julian was seated in the front row, as per the protocol for the pending partner company. His face was an unreadable mask of calm, but his eyes were locked on her. The presentation began. Amelia spoke first, outlining the vision of Auragen with a quiet, compelling authority. She was magnificent, and despite the chasm between them, Julian felt a swell of pride. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped up to the podium to present the technical data, the proof of Auragen's revolutionary battery technology that underpinned the entire deal. "And now," Marcus said with a dramatic flourish, "we will show you the live performance data from our flagship Helios project." A massive screen behind them lit up with complex graphs and streaming numbers. But something was wrong. The numbers were terrible. The energy efficiency was plummeting in real time. The battery degradation rates were catastrophic. The data suggested the technology was not just underperforming. It was a failure, a fraud. A gasp went through the audience. Reporters began murmuring their fingers, flying across their keyboards. On stage, Amelia's face went pale. This wasn't her data. This was a lie. She looked at Marcus, who wore a mask of shocked confusion, a brilliant piece of acting. I don't understand," he stammered. "There must be a technical glitch." "It's no glitch." Julian's voice cut through the stunned silence. He stood up from his seat, a phone in his hand, and walked calmly toward the stage. Security moved to intercept him, but he ignored them. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Thorne?" the moderator asked, flustered. "The meaning Tsokul," Julian said, his voice amplified by a microphone he took from the moderator's table, "is that you are all witnessing a deliberate act of corporate sabotage." He turned to the frantic tech crew. "Put this on the screen," he commanded, holding up his phone. A technician, intimidated by his sheer force of will, complied. The screen behind the stage flickered, and the fraudulent data was replaced by the string of encrypted text messages between Isabel Vance and Marcus Blackwood. "Marcus, I have an idea. A way to make both Thorne and the new queen look like fools on the world stage. It will require a data leak. Isabel. Do it. Ruin them both." The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. Marcus Blackwood froze his face, a ghastly shade of white. The blood drained from his face as he saw his own words, his own treachery displayed for the world to see. "Isabel Vance, in a bid to acquire my company's assets, after driving it into bankruptcy, conspired with Auragen's own COO, Marcus Blackwood." Julian announced, his voice ringing with cold fury. "He has just fed you falsified data to destroy this deal and discredit the brilliant work of Cordelia Dubois and the woman who now leads her company." He looked directly at Amelia, his eyes stripped of all pride, all arrogance, filled only with a desperate, pleading truth. "The real data is secure. The technology is revolutionary. This company and its CEO are the real deal." He didn't stop there. He laid out the entire conspiracy, the photo, the debt acquisition, the manipulation. He sacrificed his own image, admitting his own foolish pride had made him a pawn in Isabel's game. He exposed himself to save her. On stage, Amelia stared, her mind reeling. The betrayal from Marcus, the shocking revelation of the plot, Julian's public confession. It was too much. A sharp, searing pain shot through her abdomen, making her gasp and clutch her stomach. Mr. Harrison rushed to her side. "Amelia." She doubled over, her face contorted in pain. "The baby," she whispered, her voice strained. "It's coming." Chaos erupted. The world's biggest business deal had just imploded into a criminal conspiracy, and its CEO was going into premature labor on the world stage. Julian vaulted onto the stage, his face a mask of terror and concern pushing through the security and media swarming around them. "Get back! Give her space!" he roared, his protective instincts taking over completely. He reached Amelia's side, his eyes meeting hers. In that moment of pure crisis, the walls between them crumbled. All she saw was his raw fear for her, for their child. "I've got you, Amelia," he said, his voice soft but firm amidst the pandemonium. "I've got you." The Davos detonation was complete. But in the rubble of their corporate lives, a far more important and fragile future was fighting to be born. The sterile white of the private hospital room in Geneva was a world away from the gilded chaos of Davos. The global media was in a frenzy, replaying the dramatic footage of Julian's confession and Amelia's collapse. Isabel Vance and Marcus Blackwood were already in the custody of Swiss authorities, their corporate empires imploding under the weight of a scandal for the ages. But inside the quiet room, none of that mattered. Amelia lay in the bed, exhausted but peaceful, a small, tightly swaddled bundle nestled in her arms. A son. Their son. He had arrived a month early, small but healthy, with a thatch of dark hair and a surprisingly strong grip. Julian had been a constant presence. He had orchestrated her emergency medical transport from Davos with terrifying efficiency, bulldozing through diplomatic and logistical hurdles. He had waited pacing the hallway for 7 agonizing hours during her labor, refusing to leave. He hadn't demanded to be in the room. He had simply waited, his face etched with a vulnerability she had never seen before. Now he stood by the window, his back to her, giving her a moment with the baby. The silence in the room was no longer tense or angry. It was hesitant, fragile, but imbued with a potential she hadn't thought possible. "He has your eyes," she said softly. Julian turned, his own eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and shed tears. He walked slowly to the bedside and looked down at his son. A look of profound wonder, of utter heart-stopping love transformed his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out a hesitant finger, stroking the baby's cheek. "What's his name?" "Alexander," Amelia replied. "Alexander James Thorne." She had given him Julian's middle name. It was an olive branch, a recognition that despite everything, this child was a part of them both. Julian finally looked at her, his gaze direct and stripped of all pretense. "Amelia, he started, his voice cracking. "There are no words. Sorry is an insult to what I did. My pride, my stupid, worthless pride. I saw the photo with Isabel as a business problem. I saw your hurt as an emotional overreaction. I was a fool. I failed you. I failed him," he said, his gaze dropping to the baby. "I hid behind my work because I was a coward. I let you walk away because it was easier than admitting I was wrong. I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness, even if I never get it." Amelia listened, seeing the truth of his words in his shattered expression. The man in front of her wasn't the arrogant titan from the penthouse. He was the man who had publicly dismantled his own reputation to protect her, the man who had looked at their son with a reverence she never thought him capable of. "You didn't just let me walk away, Julian," she said quietly, her voice gaining strength. "You forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. What happened? It was unforgivable. But it led me here. It led us to him." She shifted slightly, making room on the edge of the bed. "Sit down." He hesitated, then sank onto the mattress, his eyes never leaving the baby. What Isabel and Marcus did was evil, Amelia continued. But they only had power because we gave it to them. You gave it to them with your pride, and I gave it to them with my silence. We stopped talking to each other, Julian. Tears welled in Julian's eyes. I promise you, Amelia, I will never stop talking to you again. I will never hide anything from you again. I love you. I know I have no right to say that, but it's the truest thing in my life. I never stopped. A single tear traced a path down Amelia's cheek, but this time it wasn't one of sorrow or war. It was a tear of release. A few months later, the world looked very different. Auragen Innovations. Its reputation, enhanced by the foiled sabotage, had skyrocketed in value. Thorn Industries, under Julian's newly humbled leadership, had stabilized. The 30% equity transfer went through, but it was no longer a weapon. It was the foundation of a new combined entity. The Thorn-Auragen Alliance, the most powerful green technology and logistics force on the planet. The real contract, however, was signed not in a boardroom, but in a quiet nursery. It was an unspoken agreement of late-night feedings, shared smiles over a sleeping baby, and long talks after Alexander was put to bed. It was a partnership built not on stock prices and legal clauses, but on honesty, forgiveness, and a shared love for the little boy who represented their second chance. Amelia and Julian were not the same people they had been. The scars remained a reminder of the battle they had endured, but they were stronger for them both as individuals, and finally as a team. They were co-CEOs, co-parents, and partners in the truest sense of the word, rebuilding their empire and their family one honest day at a time. The woman who signed the divorce papers had lost a husband, but the woman who held her child had gained a universe, and the millionaire who had lost everything had finally found what was truly priceless. And so a signature of divorce became the first line in a new contract, one written not on paper, but on the heart. Amelia and Julian's journey shows us that sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. It's a story of betrayal, but also of incredible resilience, of a woman who refused to be a victim and instead became a titan, and a man who had to be brought to his knees to finally stand tall. What do you think? Was Amelia right to hide her pregnancy? Could you forgive a betrayal as deep as Julian's, even after he fought to redeem himself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of heartbreak revenge and ultimate redemption moved you, please show your support by hitting that big like button, sharing it with a friend who loves a story of an epic comeback, and most importantly, ringing that notification bell and subscribing to the channel. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store for you. Thank you for listening.